I want to thank you for being here today for our church and for our Memorial Day program. I don't know if you've noticed the sign out front or not, but look at it if you haven't. Look at it when you start to leave. It's got a good message on it. I like to see some of the church signs and what they come up with. But I'll just tell you this one. I think I remember it right. It says, "We remember many and honor all." So I think that speaks well for what we're talking about today and remembering our military on Memorial Day. The first thing we want to do, I think, today is do our pledges. And as I look around and see our young people, I always try to involve our young people some way. And I'd like for them to come up and lead us in pledge to the American flag and to the Christian flag. So can your boys come up? And got any more young people that can? Yeah, there's another a visitor we have here. And so will all of you stand and do the pledge with us, with the young people leading us?
Pledge to the U.S. flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Pledge to the Christian flag. I pledge allegiance to the Christian flag and to the Savior, for whose kingdom it stands, one brotherhood, uniting all Christians in service and love.
Thank you. Be seated. At this time, I want to introduce our guest speaker today, friend of all of us, and Paul Hurd is a veteran and retiree of the U.S. Army. He's a retired Master Sergeant, retired, and he's going to come and share some with us today. Paul. Turn it on.
Is that on?
On or off?
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
All right, turn it on. You want-
Out there. Y'all see my combat memory book? I had this in Vietnam for 3 years. And had to have something camouflage where it's not white, the color of Desert Storm. So, Richard said I'm retired from the military, been in 22 years active duty. Been to Vietnam 3 times. And I was a pretty young fellow then, but on my first tour of duty over there, all I did was set up communication sites. That's what I was in, was communications. And fly all over Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and then to Thailand, setting up communication sites. And after the first tour, they sent me back to the States for 6 months, and then straight back to Vietnam again to the same place I left. During that tour, all I'd done was inspected those communication sites. And of course, combat was going on pretty heavy then, and all I'd done was flew out to sites and then kept the statistical records, everything for them to brief the general on. After my second tour, came back to the States for about 6 months, they sent me to Korea. And came back to the States again, for about 6 months, they sent me back to Vietnam again. And during that time, all I'd done was worked in a communications facility. The largest in the Far East had been built while I was over there before and stuff. And I was a sergeant in charge of about 300 men, and all we done was took messages from the combat zone and sent them back to the Pentagon or wherever they went, whoever needed that. And it's on one of those machines, sort of like Western Union. It'd go out on a little ticker tape machine and it'd come back in that way. And that was about what I did in Vietnam. I wasn't in combat that much. I saw a little bit when I'd go out and inspect those sites and set them up. Because when the first troops went into Vietnam, it was in April of '65, and I went in August of '65. So we had to go in where they was setting up headquarters and stuff, put out a communication site. I'll give you a little bit of oversight of what Vietnam looks like, size and everything of where it is and what they have there. Vietnam's about the size of California, set up about in the same structure. On one side of Vietnam, you got the South China Sea, and on the other side, you got Cambodia, Laos, and Campuchia. And they're between Vietnam and Thailand. Thailand is friendly for us. Laos and Cambodia and stuff are the enemy forces of Vietnam, and that's where all this fighting went on. But they had about 2.5 times as many people as the state of California does. So they were real crowded and had very little land to work on and stuff, because everywhere they were, that they had to be by water somewhere, along the sea, along the rivers that come in, because that's mostly what they did was grow their rice in the rice paddies and catch fish. And of course a few vegetables here and there, which they didn't do many of those and stuff. But they'd set up their little village near where water was so they could get out and in, and all the fighting was out in the outlands, and they very seldom went into the cities where they were. They mainly grew rice and a few vegetables, I said. Vietnam had been in war, I reckon, all the country's history. Even China was in control of it back in the 800 and 900s. And then France went in over there, and they was in and out for about 40, 50 years. But in 1858, China started fighting with Vietnam, and they fought them for about 75 years and stuff. And along toward the end of that time, the U.S. started providing support and money to France to fight Vietnam with. So, but in the end, in 1954, Vietnamese defeated France. And that's when France started pulling out, and that's when the U.S. started sending advisors in on how to fight and what to do, and advisor status. But then in 1954, when Vietnam defeated France, it's when the Geneva Convention was, and they met in Geneva, Switzerland and stuff to discuss breaking Vietnam down into one Vietnam and making it a North and South Vietnam. Of course, the North went with China, went with the communists, and the South was a non-communist. They tried to set up elections during that time, and they couldn't get settled on when to do one or what to do with and stuff. So they really divided the country up then, and the border, it really, from one to the other, is only about 40 miles wide. It's not as big as the DMZ in Korea is. Anyway, they divided it up, sat there, tried to get elections going, and they couldn't. And after then, from about 1957 on to 63, the North started doing a little bit of fighting with the South, and vice versa. In 1963, South Vietnam conquered the president of North Korea and killed him, or not North Vietnam. And that's when everything broke out into a full-scale war. But 1964, in November, they passed the act to enforce what several other presidents had done before, that any communist country that was trying to show aggression over an uncommunist country, they would send in help and advisors and try to get them to, get the communists out. And then, in March of 1965, the first combat troops set foot in Vietnam. And from in the late 50s on until then, for about 15 years, the U.S. had advisors in South Vietnam, or in Vietnam and then in South Vietnam. And then the war broke out, and that's when I went over in August of '65, after that started. And when they got over and got started, they ran into a lot of major problems which I didn't expect to begin with. These people in Vietnam are about 5 feet tall. That's about right here. So they're sort of like the Koreans and everybody else. And they could get in small holes and in tunnels and stuff and get in out of the way before we couldn't find them. Excuse me. And that set up some of the problems. Another problem was black pajamas, what they call them. In South Vietnam, you would see some with black pajamas on, all black. And come to find out later on that those people were the Viet Cong. We were fighting two different people over there, well, really probably three. The Viet Cong were South Vietnamese people who sympathized with the South Vietnamese. They lived there. They supported the communists but lived in the South. Then you had the North Vietnamese troops, and then, of course, China was on the north side of North Vietnam, and they supported the communists. And I'll tell you a little later on some more about that. Another thing around was thick underbrush, and that's what you probably heard about Agent Orange on the news and stuff, and that's where it's something other similar to Roundup. And they would take that and spray those jungles. And them jungles was about as green as this is green on my notebook here. And they killed the brush so they could find where these holes was in the ground in the tunnels and get to where these people were hiding from. Another problem they ran into, which they didn't expect, the Vietnamese have a lot of bamboo, which is a cane pole that I call it. They would cut those off in a sharp point, stick them in the ground, cover that up with vegetation and stuff where you couldn't see it. People come along, step in a hole, but then in there, and those things would stick them in the leg and stuff. But on top of that, they put poison on them, and that's what killed a lot of our troops and stuff. Our troops had steel-plated combat boots on the bottom, but when you step in one of those holes and it goes down and it pierces your leg and everything else, and that's where the poison got into it. It also make bears all some this big, some bigger than that, and put them bamboo spikes in them and set up a trap. And our troops would walk along and they'd kick a little cord or something. It would release that trap and that thing would spring up with them spikes and hit them. And that was another problem that they had. Is I said about the holes in the ground. I said the people were kind of small. They would dig holes in the ground and put the vegetation that was there before to smooth in with the other ones that same there. And our troops would go by over it, and you could step on that and do it. And then after you got by, they would raise that thing up, raise that hole they were saying, they'd just raise it up like that and start shooting you in the back. And that's one thing that they had to get straightened away. And so after they got over there and found that out, when they'd go out on patrol, they had about 15 men on patrol. There'd be about 10 or 11 up front, and there'd be about 4 in the back that was turned around about 3/4 of the way or all the way back, backing up to see them when they raised those little traptions on top of the hole up and start shooting, they could find out where they were. And that's one of the main problems that people raise up and start fighting you out of that underbrush, and then they you didn't know where they were. They either retrieved back into Laos or Cambodia through the tunnels they had in there, and that was sort of a little bit of a problem. They didn't know this at first when we went over there and started fighting in Vietnam, that they had a problem because for North and South Vietnam, the distance was about 40 miles from the ocean to the communist Laos. And they didn't have a way to get their ammunition from north to south. So during the time, and they had so many people and stuff, they sort of done like the Mexicans did down with the cartel coming into Texas. They'd dig tunnels. And they dug probably 600-700 miles of tunnels, and that's where they carried their ammo, from the north to the south. And they had so much ammo stored down in the southern portion they call Mekong Delta, and that was way below Saigon, that just before the end of the war, the president ordered them to go in there and bomb that because they had intelligence saying that they had stored a lot of them down there, and they was going to start and come up from the lower end of Vietnam into Saigon to defeat us. And they bombed that, and it was amazing the amount of ammunition that they had down there, that they had carried 400, 500, 600 miles through those tunnels to the lower part of South Vietnam. And a lot of that stuff has got mountains and regions in it like that. It's hard to go in, but you know, a short person like that, and the way they go in their rice paddies, they bend over a lot. They was used to that. And that's the way they got the ammunition down to the south. I'm not going to talk about any of that combat stuff, what went on over there, because a lot of it I won't talk about. And I've told Richard that I won't talk about it, because some of the stuff I've seen and went on over there is still classified, and it's stuff that, you know, everybody don't need to hear about. The U.S. won all major battles that they've ever been in, with the exception of Vietnam. What they run into there was they didn't accomplish their mission there. And as soon as they'd break out in a fight, they'd come in at night. That's the way the North Vietnam and the Viet Cong would do. They would kind of throw grenades in over on you at night, fire a few rounds and stuff, and take off running back into the dark. And then you can't see them black pajamas in there, because I have seen them at night over there, and they're very hard to see. And they do that, and come back in those tunnels to where the ammunition was, and go back into Laos and Cambodia and stuff, and we didn't go over there fighting. So we was kind of limited in what we can do. The reason North Vietnam had a lot of supplies and stuff to where they at, because they were supported by China, because China's on the north side of North Vietnam. And come to find out that Russia and China were supplying troops to North Vietnam and supplies and stuff. And North Vietnam troops bring them down through them tunnels to get the ammo down to them. The people back here in the U.S., especially Jane Fonda's crew, that they said was dragging the war out in Vietnam. But you can't drag out something if you can't find the enemy and see him and get him there in front of him and kill him. It's hard to drag it out. It lingered on, yes. But all of the rigmarole back in the United States then, when the war was going on, that they sort of divided the country into two sections. One group they called the Hawks, and the other group they called the Doves. Now, I don't know how that got started, but the Hawks was for Vietnam and supported the troops and stuff. And the Doves was those that demonstrated, like Jane Fonda. And I put that down, I wanted to mention that. I came to Vietnam the first time, and they were demonstrating out in California where I came in. I had eggs thrown at me. I had rotten oranges thrown at me, and I didn't like it. But Jane Fonda was behind most of that, but Jane Fonda could put her some combat boots, go over to Vietnam and see how this stuff was. She might not have done what she did. But, and they said it was baby killers, women killers, and all that. And where that got derived from is the Viet Cong who lived in South Vietnam and were fighting against South Vietnam. But they yet were communists. When they was out fighting and they had the tanks and stuff, they would grab a kid or a woman and stuff and throw them in front of them and use them as a guard. And that's how a lot of them got killed, because they got thrown in front of the soldiers of the Viet Cong, so they wouldn't get killed. And that was a pretty good sized problem with us over there. if you would, go ahead and put that Vietnam Wall up on the screen, please. You can't hardly see it, but I'm gonna go over a couple of things on here. North Vietnam lost about, nearest they can estimate, about 800,000 troops in the war. South Vietnam lost over 1 million. And the U.S. lost, what they have on this thing, you can't hardly see it, but about 50, just a little over 58,000. There's only 365,000 wounded that they have on record. These numbers may be a little bit off. But what was kind of jumped out at me was that 69% of the people killed in Vietnam were 22 years or younger. And that's all of our kids getting killed in Vietnam. 33,000 of them were 18 years old. 12 were 17 years old, and we had 5 that were 16 years old. And these are all kids who was over there fighting this war. The 3 sets of father and sons got killed over there. And 31 families lost 2 kids out of their family in this war. 8 women were killed over there, and there were nurses, and 244 soldiers got the Medal of Honor, and 153 of them named is on this wall. My best friend got killed over there. And we were real good friends, and he, anyway, he played football, and I played football, and I played right end, he played left hand. He went to my house for Thanksgiving, I went to his house for Christmas, and that's how close it was growing up. And he got killed over there on my second tour of duty. And during my second tour of duty over there, I want to tell this, that I had a general to try to point me to be an officer, a captain. He was going to give me a battlefield commission. I wanted to fill out the paperwork. So I said, I'll think about it. Then 2 or 3 days later, he asked me, and he's a 1-star general. And I'd done a little work for him. I helped, I made poster signs and graphics and stuff. And also, and you probably never seen this, you ever seen anybody write on the back side of a glass where you can read it on the front side? I did that for about 3 months for the general's briefing. But anyway, he asked me, he said, you filling papers out? And I said, no. And he said, well, why not? And I said, do you want to hear a long story, or you want me to shoot from the boot? And he said, shoot from the boot. And so I told him, I said, officers have their booze parties, let me put it blank. And I said, I don't drink. And I said, I'm not going to a party where y'all drink. And if you're a lower ranking officer, you have to provide the booze and the dinner and the bill for the higher officer. And they space it around to wherever you are, that each one takes a turn, and you have to do that. And I told him that nobody is telling me that I got to go to a booze party and do this and do that and pay for somebody else's, well, ignorance is what I said, going doing their booze. And he said, I've never heard it that way, but said, I'm glad you told me. So that's probably the reason I didn't take a commission as an officer over there, because I don't go around to all them things and stuff. And all these other veterans will know that they do have a lot of booze going around, and you get off in the evening, they go to this club and that club. I'll mention a couple of little things and I'll be done. What I said a while ago, that the U.S. Army failed to achieve the mission that they had set out to do. And really, from all the talk and stuff that's heard, it really hurt the military's pride by not being able to do that over there on account of various situations and getting out. And they was bitter about it, painful, and memories of it and everything like that. And a lot of that caused a lot of the veterans to have a lot of suffering. A lot of them, when they came back from Vietnam, like they did in the Desert Storm, in Afghanistan, and Iraq, a very high divorce rate in the military back then. A lot of them turned to drugs, alcohol, had a lot of suicides back then. Then the suicides kind of leveled off a little bit in the military from not being in combat till I went back to Iraq. And a lot of them got involved in crime, homeless, jobless, and everything like that. And I've had people ask me, how did I put up with that? How come I didn't get involved in drugs and suicide and all this stuff? And I spent 3 tours over there, and a lot of these people didn't spend but 1. And I told them, I said, I don't handle it. I'll let the Lord handle it. Thank you. There you go, Richard.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to scroll some names on our screens. I really like our new sound system. We're able to do some things with that we couldn't do before. And what we want to do is recognize by number the number of people that has, or the number of veterans that has been buried in our cemetery here. And we have a few that were members of our church and they were buried someplace else. But in our cemetery, we have 1 World War veteran and we have 9 World War II veterans. And in other cemeteries that we had 3 that were members of our church at one time, but were not buried here. But we're going to scroll the names here now. And before we do that, I'd just like to tell you that, for your extended family, we're just, kind of looking at our local cemetery here at the church and members of the church, but we were not able to do the extended families where, it would amount to hundreds of people. And but if you will, there'll be some music played, and look at the scrolls and see these veterans that, and speaking of veterans, World War II veterans, we have with us Buck, and we're going to recognize him in just a few minutes. So can we get the scroll now?
If tomorrow all the things were gone, I'd work for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston and New York to LA, well, there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say that I'm proud doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the
But when you see the names and the branches of service, it kind of adds to our appreciation for the veterans. I love all of our veterans, but especially our World War II veterans. Tom Brokaw, news anchor for one of the major newsworks, wrote a book and had a lot of pictures in it, and it was called The Greatest Generation. And I have that book, and kind of agree with that. World War II veterans, you know, they left. Some didn't make it back. Others come back and went to work, but they did what they had to do. You know, I can remember when some of the stuff was rationed and stuff like that. World War II and all the veterans really has paid the price. And if you happen to see a World War II veteran, or any veterans, but especially World War II, it's kind of hard to find a cap that's got World War II veteran. And I mean, I've looked at Shaw Air Force Base and different places, and they just don't have that many World War II caps to recognize World War II veterans. But we found one, and I've been wanting to get Buck one. Will you give it to Buck? It's kind of easy to get, you know, emotional when you start thinking about how old our World War II veterans are, and Buck, we want to thank you for your service and wish you well in the days ahead. Let me tell you this, I talked to Buck one day this week, and he had a little fall in his flower garden and broke your walking stick, didn't you, Buck? Yeah, that's okay. I was just talking about you broke your walking stick when you fail. But we thank you for your service, Buck. Could we give him a hand, please? Thank you. At this time, we're going to have our medleys for the different branches of the military. And when your music plays, if you will, stand for it and then be seated so we can recognize the next branch. We don't have representatives of all the branches of the military, but we're going to play their music anyway. And so, are you ready, Nicole? We'll start with the Army, U.S. Army. Next will be the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Air Force. Now the U.S. Marines. And now the U.S. Coast Guard. Now the U.S. Merchant Marines. We have one more branch of the military. I want to say just a few words about it before we play the music. A year ago, we had 6 branches of the military. Today, we have 7. And maybe you've heard about it, and maybe you haven't. But the Defense Department wanted to have a branch of the military to support the Space Force, the shuttles and spaceships and things like that. So we now have a 7th branch of the military, and the name of it is the Space Force. And the Space Force will be something like the Air Force. They'll go a little higher than the Air Force does, but anyway, it's going to be, they're going to have ground support now for Space Force. They've really had the shuttles and the astronauts and all that, and they've had other branches of the military to support, ground force support for them. Like in the Air Force, they have the maintenance to keep the airplanes flying, the Space Force is going to have stuff like that. And most of the positions in the Space Force will be ground support because there's a lot more ground support than there are astronauts. But anyway, we got a seventh branch of the military now, and Bruce has been able to find the CD, and you know, I don't know where he got it, but he did good. They've got their flag now, and they started recruiting now. And I saw the 6 first recruits not long ago, and I was thinking it would sure be nice to be 20 again. And if I was, I'd look for me a Space Force recruiter. But it's exciting to, you know, have another branch of the military. And at this time, we're going to play taps. And I would like, what, Bruce? Yeah, I told you, yeah, we do have a CD for Space Force. I was about to forget that. If you will, you know, you've probably never seen what the flag's going to look like or heard the music, so at this time we'll do that. If you will now, will you all stand, if you're able to stand, please? And we're going to have taps at this time. You may be seated.